Shalom and welcome to In the Beginning. I'm Rabbi Eric Tokajer with Brit Am Messianic Synagogue in Pensacola, Florida, and my co-host
Wayne Leland, Rabbi of Israel Messianic Synagogue in Navarre, Florida.
And we're glad to be live back in the studio after a couple of weeks away. And the phone number here is 623-1330, 623-1330. If you would like to call in and ask questions or make comments, you can also go to our Facebook page, In the Beginning Radio Program. That's In the Beginning Radio Program. I want to once again thank Tamara Alexander, Natasha Krause-Reynolds, and Jonathan Lane for that beautiful song that opens and closes our program, sung by Natasha Krause-Reynolds, written and produced by Tamara Alexander, along with the writing of Jonathan Lane. And you can find more about Tamara and Natasha's music by going to their CD Baby pages, which are both posted on our Facebook page, In the Beginning Radio Program. Now, Rabbi Wayne, there's a lot of things going on in the world, and one of the things I wanted to talk about, and we're going to talk some scripture stuff in a little bit, and we'll answer any questions people might have and such, but we are in the midst of a religious war going on around the world. Now, it's not one religion against one religion. It's one religion against all other religions. And it's spreading, and it's been, the last couple of weeks have been even greater spreading of it. Belgium is basically under martial law this week as a result of Islamic threats against that country. Paris, we had over 130 people killed as well as hundreds more injured last week. We have attacks going on in Israel on a regular basis. We have Islamic radicals trying to sneak into our country. There were several found in the Texas border as well as in Honduras with false passports and things going on. And what I want to talk about, not just that there's this war going on, but the hypocrisy that appears to be in many people, including believers, as it relates to what's going on. And I wrote a blog that I posted this last week, and it's got some attention that went on. But I want to read it for the listeners, and then we'll discuss a little more about it. But it says, Paris, the title of it was Paris, the World's Hypocrisy Meter. And it says, this past week, Paris was hit by a horrendous terror attack with well over 100 dead and hundreds more injured. The whole world responded strongly in support of France and her people, and terrorism was condemned almost universally. This, of course, should be the response of the world to terrorism. The difficulty came not with the condemnation of the terrorists and their terrorist activities, but with the nature of the response to these acts and the nature of the response to the response of these acts. The French Prime Minister and the President, François Hollande, declared it's in strongest terms, we are at war. We therefore will take exceptional measures, and this war we will win. And he went on to say terrorism hit France not because of what it is doing in Iraq or Syria, but for what it is. When the Prime Minister spoke these words, he was applauded by leaders the world over, and the news media rejoiced at the strong conviction of the French people as they rise up against this enemy. But imagine for a minute Prime Minister Netanyahu saying these same words. The world would jump to their feet and scream in offense and injustice. Now, here's where the hypocrisy stands out so strongly. ISIS is an Islamic terrorist network just like Hamas. ISIS attacked soft targets with intent to kill and injure innocent civilians just like Hamas. ISIS used homicide explosive belts and small arms fire just like Hamas does. ISIS wants their own country in which they have no documented history or rights to, just as Hamas does. Why is it when France responds to a terrorist attack with overwhelming force, breaking in the doors of hundreds of homes, it's almost 1,000 homes now, while at the same time initiating large-scale airstrikes at ISIS targets in Syria with no concern for collateral damage to civilians, the world stands together encouraging continued attacks to destroy the terrorist enemy. There is no international calls for calm, reasoned or proportional responses. No United Nations resolutions or condemnations. In fact, we've heard nothing except universal support, even from liberal media establishments. Why is this so different from when Israel defends herself against the exact same type of attacks? From the exact same Islamic radical terrorist. When people begin to honestly think about and answer that question, then we'll be able to defeat terror. But until then, until there is universal support against Islamic terror for the United States or Europe or Russia, but also for Israel, we will never destroy Islamic terrorism. There is a real hypocrisy going on, not just as it pertains to Israel, because that's one part of it, because when Islamic terrorists attacked France, there was a overwhelming universal support from the world community in support of France, both at the Charlie Hebdo attack and now at the recent attack this last week. But when, for instance, the Mali attack went on, there was much less response. And a week before that, there was a large attack in Nigeria, and the news media didn't cover it all. Hundreds were killed. And the news media doesn't cover it all. And nobody is in uproar about this. I don't understand why, when Islamic terrorists attack people in Africa, it doesn't seem to bother people as much as when they attack people in Paris. And when Islamic terrorists attack people in Israel, people act as if the terrorists actually have a right to do that it's acceptable, that, when Islamic terrorists attack France, they're terrorists. When Islamic terrorists attack Israel, they're freedom fighters. The hypocrisy that goes on, and until the world understands we are in a religious war. We are in a war between Islam, which is trying to take over the world, and every other religion, and the people with no religion at all. And until we realize that, until we realize that it is not freedom fighters fighting in Israel against the Jews, but it is Islamic radicals, fundamentalist Islamists, who are attacking the world, and they're using Israel as a diversion to gain support from the international community. We're fighting right now. American bombers are bombing ISIS in Israel. Not very much. 75% of our sorties that are flown aren't allowed to attack targets. But we're attacking ISIS in Syria to help the Syrian people, while Syria, the government, is buying oil from ISIS, which they're supposed to be fighting against. It's amazing how deceived the world seems to be. And I even heard a news commentator say, and this was on MSNBC, said that if we just give in to the terrorists and let them have what they want, they'll leave us alone. Because the history has been that whenever anybody capitulated to the terrorists, that they stopped. Well, the truth is they do stop temporarily. But they don't stop. They just wait until it's the next thing that they want, the next piece of land, the next piece of property. I don't understand why people don't realize that the Islamic conclaves and enclaves in France, the Islamic people consider that the same as they do the occupied territories in Israel. They believe they own that's their land, their country, and they have every right to treat the people in the French people as if they are subservient to them in that land, because that's what Islam teaches. And until people both Jewish and non-Jewish, until secular people understand that Islam will not be satisfied as long as there are people that aren't Islamic on this earth. And we need to understand that. And the Christians who are supporting the Arabs that call themselves Palestinian, that don't know history, that don't understand that there was no nation called Palestine. There was a region called Palestine after the Philistine people. The Romans named the land region. Palestine after the Philistines to mock the Jews of the time and to bring the center of religion from Israel to Rome. And there was never a Palestinian people. There's never been a Palestinian language. There's never been a Palestinian government. There's never been a Palestinian currency. None of those things have ever existed. The nation Palestine is a fictitious thing made up by the Palestinian Authority, Yasser Arafat and his people, to try to deceive the world into thinking that Israel stole the land from the Arab people. There was never a country there. And the world, England and the UN, gave this land to Israel. Not just the land that's Israel today, but the entirety of the land. And there was a Arab nation established when Israel was established for the people that were Muslim, called Jordan at the same time.
Yeah, you know, Rabbi Eric, I know that's true what you're saying as far as our modern time is concerned, but we also want to remind folks that God gave that land to Israel a long time ago. He made a promise to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob in the covenant that land would belong to them, and now that they're back as a nation restored, we see again what you just said, that even our UN and all agreed, United Nations, that this land belonged to them.
Right. Israel has a over 3,000 year historical record to this land. The Arabs have no historical record to a country, to a land, to a nation on this territory, and yet they have deceived the world into giving billions of dollars to the Palestinian Authority, to Hamas now, which it's amazing, Rabbi Wayne. I don't know if you saw the article, but there's an article that was released this week that shows the level of prosperity that the Palestinian leaders, the leaders of Hamas, are living with in Gaza. You know, when the news media shows Gaza on the news, they show the squalor of the apartment buildings and the filth and all that going on, and how these people are under the thumb of Israel and how they're living in poverty and all that. They never show the immense mansions and castle-like structures that the billionaire leaders and the millionaire leaders, you know, there are more millionaires per capita, you know, in the land, the Gaza Strip. There's an amazing amount of them that are millionaires that have been squandering and stealing the money that the world has been giving to provide for the poor, disenfranchised Palestinian people, that have been going into the coffers of these Palestinian leaders. Yasser Arafat's wife still lives in France in an apartment that costs over $10,000 a month for the apartment. These Palestinian and Arab, I call them Arabs because there's really no Palestinian people, but these Arab leaders, if you look, there are articles that show pictures of the immense mansions that they're living in on the money that nations like the U.S. are giving to these Arab people, and it's being stole by their leaders who are living in UAE and other places in, you know, immense riches and splendor, while the people are suffering. And the reason they do that is because they need the people to be suffering so that the world will continue to give money to them. And they don't build roads, and they don't build schools, and they don't build things. So the United Nations goes in and builds schools, and instead of building roads and buildings and such, they build these terror tunnels into Israel and into Egypt to do terrorism against these nations. And our country and other countries of the world are so blinded by their anti-Semitism, by their hatred for Israel and the Jewish people, that they are listening to the lies of these Arabs, these Muslims, these Islamists. And now that they have that built up to that point, and now that they have ISIS, and now that they've taken over these other nations that they're taking over, they're starting to spread to these nations like France that has so financially supported and so strongly stood by these Islamists for so long against Israel, that now they're in the place where they're almost acting hypocritical against what they've already said against Israel by doing the same thing they've claimed Israel did. You know, when the French bombers are bombing ISIS and killing civilians and blowing up schools and buildings and houses in Syria, they're doing the same thing they condemned Israel for doing, only Israel did it while trying to minimize civilian casualties. And France and Russia, who came out strongly against Israel and the civilian casualties, Russia is bombing cities, and they don't care whether they're killing civilians or not. But the hypocrisy of these attacks, and again, I want to say, I believe that France should defend herself. I believe Russia should defend herself. I believe Belgium should defend herself. I think if you're attacked by anybody like these Islamists who are killing civilians and attacking and doing these things, they should be attacked. But you should not be hypocritical against another country that is defending herself when you do exactly the same thing that they're doing.
You know, Rob Eric, one thing I remember the other day, the French president saying in one of his addresses was that the words, they would have no pity on these people. They would have no pity. And yet what you just said, Israel, when they do go in to do warfare against them because they're killing people within their nation, they try to surgically do damage to the enemy itself and minimize as much as possible civilian casualties at their own expense. So, you know, you're right. It is nothing but hypocrisy. I'm really glad that France has woken up. It took, you know, more people being killed in their country by terrorism or an attack since World War II for them to wake up. But the reality of the United Nations and the nations in America and all is we need to let Israel be able to have the same right. They do have the right to defend themselves in whichever way they need to defend it. And we need to, and one of the things you said a while ago is they'll never be defeated until Israel's allowed, let alone to do that, because number one, whoever blesses Israel will be blessed, and whoever curses Israel will be cursed. As long as we tie Israel's hands up and let them keep having these attacks inside and not being able to do anything about it at a very minimum, and we treat them in this manner, we're going to continue to have the enemy against us, because we need to bless Israel. We need to fight along with Israel, the nations of the earth, in order to defeat this enemy.
Absolutely. Until we stand with Israel and the rest of the world in this battle against Islamic terrorism, we'll never beat Islamic terrorism. And we need to understand it. We need to quit being, especially Christians and Jews. You would not believe the amount of secular and liberal Jews who stand alongside the Palestinian Arab people in their stand against Israel. You know, why don't we just allow them to build a country side by side in peace and security? Well, why don't France just divide their country into two countries and let the Arabs have one half of it and split Paris in half and make one half of it the capital of the new Arab nation and one half of it the new France? It's exactly the same argument. These people, the Islamics, want a world of their own and to be the rulers of that world in an Islamic theocracy, serving the false pagan moon god Allah.
Well, you know, Rabbi Eric, too, this thing goes all the way back even to Isaac and Ishmael, and God made it very clear that the promise was not to Ishmael, it was to Isaac, but he also told Abraham, he's your son from the handmaiden. I am going to bless them too. I'm going to give them all. In fact, they have more land given to them than Israel was given to. And so, but they're not satisfied. They're not satisfied with that, so they're still trying to do warfare and to destroy Israel because of that family dispute that's going on. We have to wake up to this, and we have to realize for our liberal Jewish and Christian non-Jewish friends who are on the side of this Islamic terrorist group, they obviously don't know their God like They say they know their God. They obviously have not read their Bible clearly, that this is a spiritual warfare that leads into physical warfare that's taking place today, and we must side on the side of God and His people.
You know, Hillary Clinton made the statement this week that terrorism has nothing to do with Islam, and Muslims have nothing to do with terrorism, and we shouldn't list it that way. I don't know how she can be so blind as to not notice that the terrorism that attacked Israel this week, the terrorism that has attacked a Russian airplane recently in Egypt, the terrorism that's attacking in Egypt, attacking in Syria, attacking in Iraq, attacking in France, all these things, including attacking in the U.S., because we recently stopped Syrian ISIS people in the United States trying to buy missiles just outside of Washington, D.C. What connects all of these people? It's Islam. That's not saying that every Arab person is a terrorist, or even that every Muslim is a terrorist. But we have to take off the blinders and the rose-colored glasses and see that we are at war with Islamic people.
I want to take it a step further because of talking to ex-Islamic Muslim people who were involved in terrorism in the past, and that there's an ideology taught to these children from the time they're born to hate Jewish people, to hate Americans, to hate anybody who is not Islamic. So, and these families, this is inundated into the families. And again, I understand what you're saying, but it's inundated into these families. And when you teach a hate and death to other people who don't believe like you do, you're being taught a religion of death. And your whole family is raised up in that. And while they may be peaceable on the surface, right, the ideology will come out later on when they think they have the upper hand, and you'll see this.
I think you misunderstood what I said.
Maybe I did.
I said not all Muslims are terrorists. That doesn't mean that Muslims can't become terrorists.
Yes.
Being a terrorist means you do something with terrorism. You attack somebody, you blow something up, you try to use fear to overcome. Not all Muslims have done that yet.
Oh, I agree. I understand that.
But Islam is taught that they are a supreme religion, that they are to take over the world, that they are to subjugate those that won't become Islamic. That's the teaching of the Quran. And so just because they, it's like everybody has a propensity to commit murder. That doesn't mean everybody's a murderer.
Sure.
And so when I say not all Muslims are terrorists, that just means they haven't done the act. Yes. It doesn't mean that they have that the children, especially if you go to lands like Egypt or Syria or Lebanon, and these places where the cartoons that the children watch. Our children watch cartoons like Bugs Bunny and the Roadrunner and whatever's on today for children. Their children watch cartoons that are specifically anti-Semitic and teach children how to kill Jews, how to attack Jews, how to blow up Jews. Their children are trained where our children become Boy Scouts and Girl Scouts and learn how to camp and make fires and stuff. Their children have terrorist camps where they learn how to make explosives and shoot guns and stab people and such like that.
And once that spirit's taught into these children, only the true God of heaven can deliver them later on.
Absolutely.
From that spirit of terrorism and
Absolutely.
stuff.
Chase, welcome to the program.
Thank you, gentlemen. I'm thinking I ease this little part into it. From what it sounds like to me is we're having a religious discussion on the same subject we hold in this country as far as to race and racism. And a lot of people often quickly jump into, well, that's hating, or that's not liking somebody or something, and when it's not really that. Is actually being in a position of wealth and resources and power to exploit or exclude another set of people. Mm-hmm. Even as I listen to you guys, try to maybe, just kind of dance around the definition of Islamic terrorism. when in all actuality, a person who's not even into religion, not meaning myself, but I'm just saying, a person not into anything dealing with religion, but was reading the history of how each religion came into being, the Jewish part, the Christianity part, the Islamic part, they will quickly see that it's really just a divide and conquer thing to stay in power from a religious standpoint. Israel is going to always have a problem because that part that we consider as Israel is the only place, seriously, where the people were more of an African descent, and when they came back, they have more of a European descent playing into the part of the Jewish religion. And I think that there are scholars and people that are historians and, just getting away from the reverends and the rabbis and stuff, which I'm sure you can't have one without the other. You can't have history without religion. You can't have religion without history. And even with me being black, when I go into the Bible, starting with Noah, kids, I catch, my people catch the bad side of it. Moses' wife from Ethiopia, I mean, it always has something to picture with a curse, something dark, something black, something of the bad side.
Let me stop you for a minute,
sure,
because I want to correct a few things. One, okay, anybody that looks at the story of Noah and comes out with a white-black issue,
yes,
is perverting what the Scripture says.
Okay.
There is nothing in the story of Noah's children that say that the sons of Canaan, which are the sons of Ham, were black or became the black nations or became anything like that. That's a perversion and a twisting of Scripture. So if you take bad teaching and apply it to the Bible, then what you're saying is accurate. If you take correct teaching, for instance, Moses' wife was from Cush, which was the area that's now Ethiopia and a couple other nations. Yeah. And so she was from that land. She more than likely was dark-skinned, which isn't a problem. And the actual teaching of the Bible was that when Moses' brother and sister complained about that, in other words, they responded with hatred, God punished both Aaron and Miriam. Miriam got leprosy. Aaron was punished as a result of it. So the Bible doesn't teach racism. It teaches exactly the opposite of racism. So
I will agree with you.
No, that's not to an extent. That's what the Bible teaches. Now, because people, wait.
I will agree with you.
Wait. Let me finish my point. Let me finish my point, and then I'll let you talk.
Go ahead.
Whenever people apply bad teaching to biblical teaching, then we end up with things like racism and things like that. When we deal with historical accuracy from a biblical perspective, it teaches against racism. It teaches that God's plan was that through Abraham, all the nations of the earth would become part of one people, serving the one God of Israel. And it's because of separation and segregation and hatred and animosity and all those things that we have, 20,000+ different types of Christianity, that we have different varieties of Judaism, that we have all these different religions that come up, including Islam, which became because Muhammad, who at one time was trying to entice Jewish people to be involved with him and accept some of what he was teaching. When the Jewish people rejected it, the second half of the Quran was written, which came against Israel and the Jewish people. If you read the early writings of the Quran, it proclaims that the nation Israel, the land of Israel, was given to the Jewish people. But then when the Jewish people wouldn't accept Muhammad's teaching, he then went into a hate-filled religion where he started to behead people that didn't convert to Islam and take over city after city after city with his vicious followers, which is exactly what we see today. So when hatred and when bigotry and when racism and all those things get added to the Bible where it doesn't exist in the teachings of the Bible, then we have these things that you're talking about. But if you just read the Bible as it is written, you don't find teaching of those things. And so it's very important that we don't say the Bible incites these things. Wickedness in people incite these things, and they try to insert it into the biblical text to justify their hatred, their bigotry, their racism, their animosity, and those things.
I'm willing to. I'll go this way. I will say that partially what you're saying is true, because the word race and racism, black, white, which are crayon colors, they doesn't describe who a people are. It just describes.
Yeah, I'm not white. I'm more peach.
Okay, right, and trust me, I'm not black. I'm maybe somewhere, maybe some type of way around in the brown, slightly red, maybe, if that was the case. But however, we would have to come to an agreement on a historical standpoint. You are correct. People wasn't divided into black or white or the yellow people or the red people. That somewhere came into it. My whole point as what someone may call a African American, even though I don't believe every black person in the United States came from Africa, Africa itself, no religion ever did Africa no good. When the Christians turned ugly towards them, yes, they jumped on board with
actually,
the
Arabs. You're correct in a large way. But let me say this. Okay. If you look up historically the involvement of Judaism in Africa, I think you'll find it is the only historical religion that actually was a help to Africa. They didn't try to convert the Africans. They didn't try to downplay them. They built roads, they built hospitals, they did all kinds of things without trying to change the culture of the African people. To the extent that in early times, for instance, when Solomon was king of Israel, the entire nation of Ethiopia, because of the treatment of Israel towards the Ethiopian people, became followers of Judaism. And so, but that wasn't that Solomon made them do that. That was a result of the good treatment and the interaction and the trade and stuff.
I'll say the open-heartedness.
The open-heartedness, exactly.
I'll say the open-heartedness of the African, yes.
Right.
I will agree with you. There has been many religions that has hijacked. I used to have old arguments with brother Carl, the pastor, and some of the weekly daytime crew and whatnot. As far as yes, there has been a lot of religions that have basically hijacked. I feel that if we all agree that there's one God, and not so much get into the argument of what this prophet said or what this historian said. As far as the color, it did come into it. It did come into it, and it did play a part into the history of Africa its people being slaves.
Absolutely.
And you're right.
But now let's be accurate about this.
Okay.
There were African slaves long before Anglos got involved in slavery. Okay, so I want to say we have
right.
to. What you're saying is correct, but we have to start out by saying that Africans enslaved Africans long before.
Let's do it better than that. Let's say what the definition of that type of slavery. Yes, if you had religious downfall, meaning you had to fall into somebody else's religion who done took over. If you owed someone a debt, if you were working to pay off a debt, yes, it was, but not the exploiting part of.
Oh no, I'm sorry. I think you need to study your history. The exploitation slavery within the nations of Africa and the different tribes within Africa, exploitive slavery existed long before Anglo slavery got involved with Africa. And it's really important we understand. Now, I'm not saying that Anglo slavery was good. I'm against that in every way. I think it's an atrocity. I think that it needed, and it was done again largely for financial / perverted religious reasoning. But there was wholesale slavery for financial exploitation reasons and control reasons in the African continent long before Anglos got involved in Africa. And we need to be honest about this, Chase.
Brother Rabbi, I tell you this much. I am a history major. If you could cite me a source, or if you could give me something that will be able to prove. I don't come up with that in my research. I will say that when we use the word slave, basically originating from the word Slav, dealing with Slovenia and the Slavs and all of them, is where it came from. It was more or less to what you said. You almost said the same thing I said. It wasn't so much of a, oh, we're going to have human capital. We're going to make money off these humans. It was more of a, again, if the person fell into if the one religion had done, or one group had done whooped out another group, they would enslave the people. And that's in every group.
Right. But that slavery was exploitive. They used those people to build their cities or their towns or their villages. They used those people to farm their lands. They exploited those people.
They're already at home?
Huh?
I mean, if you think about it, they're already at home and they're going to use slaves to build their city. And we're talking about Africa. We're talking about there were cities. There were immense dwellings in Africa that were, I mean, there's golden cities in different places in Africa long before the Anglos came into the land. These African tribes, some of them were nation tribes, some of them were tribes, constantly fought against each other. When they won their battles, they would enslave the losers, and they would use them exploitively to better their society in whatever way they wanted to. We know that happened. There's no question that happened. Now, it wasn't for selling like the Africans sold their different tribes and different people, the people from Tripoli and places like that ended up selling to the Americans and the European slaves for profiting or profiteering, but it was definitely exploitive slavery. They used them, exploited their labor, their strength, their numbers to empower their communities. It was just like, I think you and I had the conversation, and I said, hey, I remember jumping up like, wow, that is so sweet, man, that Israel had went into Ethiopia and had gotten some of the lost tribes and from Ethiopia and brung them back. And I think we were having a dialogue. If it wasn't you and I, it was maybe Terry Gross. And one of his rabbis and I were having a dialogue, and I said, well, and I asked him at that moment, I said, well, you know, did they go get them and bring them into the family, like, and love and just really just let them prosper and be a part of it? Or did you just go get them? And say, oh, no, we're being nice, you know, da-da-da-da. It wasn't even a week later before it broke out to where them same Ethiopians that they brung back to Israel were protesting up against how they were being treated. All I'm saying in my argument is no religion. Yes, there's been some that came in and said, hey, we'll sit down and eat together. You do your thing and I'll do my thing, and we nothing to war about. Yes. But on the overall part, my people from Africa was so open-hearted to letting these different groups come in to where, yes, after they left the Christians and whatnot, they took on to the Islamic part of it, and whoever would back the other group up off of them, they would accept them in and try to adopt. But how can someone be trying to adopt something from the very first people on this planet? It would ever befool me. Same thing with Greece, you know. Greece making it sound like, you know, the Greeks make it sound like, you know, hey, the Egyptians got their stuff from me, you know, and whatnot. When there can't be any truth to that and whatnot. But listen, Brother Rabbi, it was a good dialogue, man. I hope we have a chance to do it again, my friend, and I'll be listening every Sunday.
I appreciate it, and I do want to say one thing. Are you still on the line?
Yes, sir, I am.
Okay, I want to talk about the Ethiopians in Israel that you spoke about, because first of all, let's put it into context of what's actually happening. And yes, there was a protest, but what's happened is you have Ethiopians that don't have education, don't have skills, that were brought to Israel, that were given apartments, houses, money, and all the things that they need to survive, food, stipends, teaching the language, putting them in schools, getting them educated, so that they can be part of Israeli society.
Benefits and privileges. Mm-hmm.
Right, all of the privilege of society, and have equal vote, equal everything. They're not mistreated in Israel. What the uprising was about was simply this, that they were settled in areas on the outskirts of Israel where the property is less expensive. Why is the property less expensive? One, it's not in a big city like Tel Aviv or Jerusalem or Haifa, but also it's less expensive because it's in areas that are close to neighbors that are not as friendly. And so they protested because they wanted to live in Tel Aviv or in Jerusalem. Now, there is no law in Israel that stops an Ethiopian from living in Tel Aviv or Jerusalem if they can afford to live there. But just like if somebody who lives in a poorer part of Pensacola, if they got up this morning and said, you know, I live in whatever community I'm in, and I live in a $70,000 house, and I think the government owes me a house in Cordova Park, because I am a citizen just as much as the person whose house is in Cordova Park, and then they have an uprising and say that the government is keeping them down, that's not a valid argument. And that's what's happening among the Ethiopian people.
To those places where
they did.
More safer.
They did. There are Ethiopians in all of those places. There are Ethiopians.
The ones that can afford it.
No. The government settled them in those areas, but the space, the housing is limited there. If you live in
Brother Rabbi, I guess I'm not understanding. When
okay, let me say. Let me start over.
Okay, go ahead.
If you were going to settle people in Pensacola,
yes.
And they want it, and so you went in the area right around the airport.
Yes.
There is a limited amounts of housing there.
Yes.
Okay? But, so you could only settle so many people in that area because there's only a limited amount of property that's empty or houses that are empty. So then you would have to say to the rest of the people, look, we're not trying to be mean to you, but there's empty land in Cantonment and J. And these
even though you're black, we're going to put you over here by J.
No, wait. First of all, we're not talking racism in Israel as you would here. There's not a historical racist element in Israel.
You are correct, sir. I have no argument to make on that.
So take it out of that context and say there is property where we can build apartments in the north part of our county. And that's the only place that there's additional places. We want you in Israel. We want you to live here. We want you to be part of our society. We're going to give you not welfare, but job, money, training, educational benefits, all the privilege of a citizenship, including voting. And there are Ethiopian Israelis in the Knesset. There are Ethiopian, Israelis in all of the aspects of Israel. Okay, then the people who live in the outskirts where there is property to build then complain and say, you settled me here and I want to live in Tel Aviv. Well, the problem is there's no place to live in Tel Aviv. And so in order to get to Tel Aviv, you would have to be able to either buy a place because somebody else is living there, or wait for somebody to evacuate that place so that you could live there. And so that's what's happening in the Ethiopian community in Israel. The ones that are living in the outer areas where there is property that can be built on, and they built beautiful apartments and townhomes and areas, not just for Ethiopians, but every kind, people from Russia, people from all the other nations, including the United States that come to Israel, they live in the same communities. They don't segregate communities, but they bring these transplants to immigrants to these, and they say this is where there's available housing, and if this is where you can move in these open areas. You have to have a house. It has to be open. You can't move somebody out and say, okay, you've been living here, but now we're going to take you out and put somebody else in here. And then those people, as they become prosperous, and Ethiopians in Israel are becoming prosperous. They're very involved in the technical community and the medical community in these fields. If you go to Israel, you'll see that they're prospering in the land. But you can't then complain and say that Israel is being mean because you're making me live here when there's no housing available, and when the world says, when Israel says we want to build housing in the Jewish areas around Jerusalem so that we can have more people living there, and the world says you absolutely cannot build in Jerusalem because the world says it's still in dispute over who's going to have that land. So you can't have the world saying you can't build apartments in Jerusalem, you can't build apartments around Jerusalem for these immigrants to live in, and then also complain about the other.
Into why that's going to always be a problem. The world is going to, I mean, fine. Here in the United States, they watching Empire and Scandal and hip hop and all of that stuff on TV. That's true. Over there, it's a whole, inside the country, it's a little bit different of a ball game. And them people know, just through history, they know that, listen, where in the world did these European Jews come from? In Israel. Hitler spoke on it. I mean, that is going to be a problem that's going to always continue to go on. And again, even as you use your example, as I agree with you, yes, there wasn't no such thing as race. It was an ethnic background or what religious part you belong to, more or less that period. But then there are some people who have no control of you or me. It wasn't either one of us that done it. There is a group of people that is backed by religion who did come in and make race and a big major player into the whole scheme of things. That is a fact. You can go in history and look and say, well, here at one time there wasn't no crayons, and then all of a sudden there is crayons. Then it needs to be explained, which we don't have the time to do as far as in a status-like standpoint of a black status versus a white status and so on and so on. However, because that did get implicated into history as far as racism, again, not dealing with nothing, dealing with hate, and bigotry is all about power, control, being able to keep.
I think it also has a lot to do with fear.
And then fear is on. There is always the other side of that called fear, with not a problem. However, my friend, we have to come to realize that even again, in using your example, when it was all said and done, even if I use, hey, you bring me and my family and a bunch of us that look like me into Pensacola, we can't really stay right there in Pensacola around the airport, so therefore you put us out there in Jay and Cantonment. I don't know how long you've been in this area. I'm not exactly from here, but I'm not from here at all. And I even had Europeans, white people, tell me here, oh, yeah, my friend, whatever you do, Jay, don't do a lot of work out there in Jay. They don't really too much care for, which
right.
I would have to say.
And I understand.
It would be the same argument as far as how they were being treated. They couldn't work in none of the businesses.
You're right, but that's not the situation that's going on in Israel. Let me share something with you real quick, and then we're going to go on. But I was raised up north, and in New York and New Jersey. Yeah, where in New Jersey?
Okay, I'm from Newark, New Jersey.
Okay, I was born in Newark.
Okay,
see, we're okay.
Clinton Avenue. My mother went to Essex County College there.
Yeah.
Most of my people stay in the Orange, East Orange, West Orange area.
Yeah, I got family all up in.
My social starts with a 1.
Yeah, I got family all in that area. Mine too, by the way. But I lived in the New York and then just outside of New York. I was born in Newark, but I lived in New York and then early in the New Jersey area. And in my community growing up, and this may shock some of our listeners, there was no racism in my community. Everybody was living together. We had block parties and I was taught in school that things like busing was over with, and that we lived they actually taught this utopian environment because that's what we lived in, whether you were Jewish or Christian or whatever. We all lived in a community together, and everybody got along and everybody watched each other's kids, and it was a great environment. I moved from New Jersey to Sarasota, Florida, and my first day in school, I got in a fist fight because I asked an African American where one of my classes was, and some rednecks, and that's what they called themselves, so I'm not being disparaging, jumped me, and I got suspended from school my first day in school because I got in a fight because of racism. It was my first experience with racism in my life, and I was a young teenager. And
now that's crazy. My principal, all my teachers, black. I actually never okay, other than my mom's job. But dealing with school, I never was around that many Europeans or white people until we moved from New Jersey down to Alabama. Had not. I mean, my principal was black. The secretary was black. One of my aunts worked down in the cafeteria, black. You know, all the students were black. Just one guy named Jigme. His mom was European, but she was married to an African guy. And we never saw anything different, no more than that's Jigme's mom and dad. That's all we knew. It wasn't no more than what we caught on television.
So I ended up getting very shocked and really hurt emotionally, because in Sarasota at that time there was a African community called Newtown, and I'm not sure if it's still that way now. I don't live in the area and haven't for a lot of years, over 30 years. But they actually bused students to all the schools. Now, all the stuff I was taught up north that didn't exist anymore was still happening in South Florida. They were still busing students from the black parts of town, the African-American parts of town, to the white parts of town to desegregate the schools. And all that was going on. I was shocked. It was actually emotionally hurtful to me, and I had to deal with things for a long time because my whole world was shaken, because where I lived up north, everybody got along. We all, there was nothing for the African American next door to watch us, or us to go to dinner at their house, or all of us on the block to have dinner together and have a big barbecue and all those things. Now, there were religious differences because, we didn't eat pork chops while others did and things like that. But we all got together and hung out and had, all these things together. And it wasn't until I moved south that I experienced racism at all. So it's a different thing, a different environment. And so,
Brother Rabbi, we'll have to get back together again and do a little bit of New Jersey from your aspect, and we'll do a little bit from mine. I would maybe argue a little bit. I could think of a few stories from the.
I'm sure if you lived actually in the Newark area, it was different than the Springfield Union area that I lived in.
Right.
And I understand that, but my world was different. And it wasn't until I moved south that I realized that the teachers were lying to me in my schools in New Jersey about all the great progress that we had in the racism area. And of course now 30-something years later, we have made great progress. It's not enough. Clearly not enough, but there's great progress that's been made, and I hope we make much more. And I hope that people will open their Bibles and realize that the Bible was not written to white people, or Hispanic people, or black or African people, or Asian people, but it's written to people.
I will agree to this. I will say that we can keep history as it is. We just need to add the Africans, the blacks, or whatever you want to call them, into history and be able to explain it from that point. That's one thing. The other thing is people have to understand, as far as the way they stand in the United States of America, which is a corporation, and the whole thing going back to Lincoln and what's supposed to be the definition of free from what, free to do what, and whatnot. We cannot continue to say one thing and then history shows us completely something different. And it doesn't have to be anything. Nobody needs to jump up and down and be wanting to hurt each other and beat each other up. It just needs to be sat down and put things in its proper place, and then everybody will be ready to move forward. At least you have the truth. So I will agree with you on that as far as being truthful about things.
Well, I appreciate your call.
It's been fun, Brother Rabbi. It has, man.
And we'll have to, I don't know if you drink coffee, but we should get together for a cup of coffee and talk about the, New Jersey.
I'll love to do that, sir.
Okay.
Well,
all right.
Thank you for your call.
Shalom.
Thank you.
Shalom. Well, Rabbi Eric, it's been interesting sitting here and listening to this because I understand both sides of it. And actually, I was raised young here in the area. And I have, family members that don't have problems with racism, and there's some that probably do. And so, but the interesting thing about it is I hope Chase is still listening, is in our congregations, in our synagogues, we don't believe in racism. We believe in one race. That's God's race of people. And it's
the human race.
Yeah, the human race is made up of everybody. And whoever wants to...
Right, if you went to your congregation or my congregation or most of the Messianic congregations in the area, you would see people from every background.
Yes,
we have people from Europe, we have people from America, from Central and South America, we have people from Israel, we have people from that have descendants from African nations or Caribbean nations. We have people from Arab nations. We have people from Eastern Europe and Western Europe. We have people from all over. I don't think we have anybody in our congregation from Australia or New Zealand, but we really would like to.
Yes.
But the thing is that there's a Bible that was written by God's people through the inspiration of the Ruach, the Spirit of God, and it was given to all people. And there's one Bible for all people, and one expectation, as Rav Shaul or the Apostle Paul said, that those who were either natural branches or wild branches are all grafted into the exact same tree.
Amen. Yes, and when people read the Bible in the context and the setting it is, then they will come to the same conclusion that we are all one people and we should all be in love with one another as we're in love with God, and we should treat each other with respect and dignity. And all those issues go away. We're trying to put into practice, to the best of our ability, what brings people together in unity. When, as Jay said, a lot of nations and a lot of political entities in the world are still just talking about it, still fussing and fighting about it. If they had just give their heart to God and obey God, then that would go away and we would have the shalom and peace. And I'm not ignorant to the fact that it probably won't be totally completed until Messiah returns, but we're going to do our best to obey God and do our part in this.
And let's just take a moment, Rabbi Wayne. Why don't you tell the listeners where your congregation is? We haven't talked about our congregations at all. It's been a good phone call.
Yeah, it really has.
And I enjoyed talking with Chase, and we need to understand that there's a unity of the body, a unity of people that God's longing for.
Well, my congregation, or our congregation, is Israel Messianic Synagogue. And actually, the word Am means people of Israel. And the people of Israel are all people who have come to faith in Messiah. And so we meet at 9255 Military Trail in Navarre, Florida. To find out more about us, you can go to shalomnavarre.com. Or you can call me directly at 850-293-4721. We have a weekly Sabbath service, and that takes place on Saturday at 1 o'clock, and a Tuesday night interactive Bible study that takes place at 7 o'clock. We'd like to invite all to come out.
And I'd like to invite you to come out to Brit Am at 6700 Spanish Trail. You can find out more about Brit Am by going to shalompensacola.com. And I want to invite everybody on December the 5th. We have a special guest, Rabbi Stuart Winograd, who has a outreach ministry in Belarus as well as in Israel and in India. And it's always exciting to hear from him. We encourage you to come out. If you're in the Gulf Coast area, go by and visit a Messianic synagogue near you, whether it's Congregation Mayim Chaim in the Eastern Shore or Beit Israel in Mobile, Tree of Life in Mobile, Am Yisrael in Navarre, or Brit Am in Pensacola. We encourage you to come out and join together worshiping the King of Kings in unity.
Hallelujah.
Shavua Tov.
Shavua Tov.
Beginning